Hi everyone! It's been a satisfying day. It's been sunny, warm, and our projects are slowly coming together. In fact, Lee is still out there in the cockpit, hard at it, but it's time for me to edit another video and bring you up to date. And our cabin is a big mess. Just a couple of days ago, the cabin was reasonably tidy. But in preparation for the arrival of the solar panel frame, Lee needed access to the quarter berth and the wiring leading to the panels, hence all the tools that were relocated from their storage area. I helped Lee physically remove the old panels. The panels were installed by the previous owners and were attached to the bimini framework with easy-to-remove plastic tubing clamps. The thinking behind using this type of clamp is to facilitate panel removal, say in the event of prepping for a hurricane. Over the years, we found that the clamps deteriorated from the sun and became brittle. Lee replaced some of the clamps, but found they were expensive and, for his money, not durable enough. He settled on using new bolt clamps. On this panel, when the plastic tube clamps were unscrewed and opened, 3 out of the 4 broke off. On other panels, probably newer clamps endured and performed as expected. The U-bolts, too, had their problems, being difficult to unthread. After an application of Croyle penetrating oil and being left for 2 hours, did the bolts finally yield after the fitting was lightly tapped with a hammer and then torque applied to the bolts. Bottom line, if speed is of the essence in panel removal, the plastic clamps are probably the way to go. Just be aware they need periodic replacement. Omar and his crew arrived with the new solar panel frame.
Ok, espérense, hay que hacerlo para atrás porque tenemos que evitar el boom, ¿sale?
The original panels were very rigid and sturdy, and we were concerned that our new, lighter panels would flex and break if anchored in a similar manner as the old panels. We needn't have worried. The new panels fit into the frame perfectly, and then using new bolts Omar had made, the frame and panels were bolted to the bimini frame, giving the solar panels the support needed. This is the second welding job Omar has done for us, and we find him reliable. He does good work, and we highly recommend him. Lee wired in the new panels using MC4 solar connectors and adding a few new holes in the frame to accommodate plastic cable clamps to neaten up the wiring. Have you noticed the pattern on the lower side of the panels? The new panels are bifacial, meaning they can produce power from both sides, which is a boon for boats where there is plenty of reflection from the water. The panels have been in operation for 2 days, and they do indeed produce 3 times the power of the old panels. We are delighted. On a different subject, a problem that cropped up after I returned to La Brisa was the loss of another burner on the stove. The left front burner was now the only functioning burner. The back, high-output burner worked only briefly, and we have made do for a long time with just the 2 front burners. Our problem burners would light, but not stay lit, even after allowing adequate time for the thermocoupler to heat. Lee learned our stove was manufactured in 2002, and the Force 10 website said they guaranteed the availability of replacement parts for 10 years or longer. With a replacement cost of over $2,000, Lee wasn't very hopeful when he contacted Force 10 after sales service. One of the first suggestions he received was to remove the burner orifices and to soak in rubbing alcohol for an hour. Then use a brush to remove any debris. That seemed to take care of the problem with the front right burner. On a cold evening with a hot buttered rum, Lee pored over the stove manual and then rummaged through the stove parts we had inherited with the boat. Lee found 2 thermocouplers with the new style grounding wire, and with advice from Jocelyn at Force 10 on how to install, all 3 burners are now in working order.
Wow, it stays lit.
We were impressed with the knowledgeable service from Force 10, glad to not be buying a new stove, and also grateful to the previous owners for their diligent documentation. Our ongoing project from the last video is slowly nearing completion. Since the last video when Lee used fairing compound to fill in the former caulk seams, he then united the entire top of the seahood with a layer of fiberglass. Unfortunately, we did not have sufficient amount of triaxle cloth and ended up using chopped strand mat. Shading the area to prolong working time and following West Systems' suggestion of doing a dry layup, Lee squeegeed the epoxy into the mat cloth. The mat had been stored folded up in a cabinet for several years, and he found it difficult to remove the wrinkle from the folds. The fin roller seemed to work the best. As much as I tried to avoid being around the epoxy, I was nominated to grind off the hardened excess cloth around the hood top. The center fold was still apparent. Lee kindly mixed up batches of regular epoxy, which I layered on using chip brushes. Once the 5 layers of epoxy had cured, I sanded the surface, beginning with 80 grit sandpaper and finishing with 220 for a smooth, even surface. You can see the multiple layers where the high spots sanded off. And even though I covered up and gloved up, the lingering epoxy dust still got to me, and all I can say is, thank goodness for Benadryl and cortisone cream. 2 coats of primer were applied and sanded, then topped with Interlux Brightside polyurethane. I had problems keeping a wet edge, and after trial and error have decided 3 coats is enough. In a day or 2, I will be applying Kiwi Grip non-skid to the center. At the same time as our seahood project, work was going on next to us. Neil and Marian's La Boheme was being sanded, faired, sanded again, faired again, all inspiring me in my paltry sanding efforts. As I was applying the last coat of Brightside, La Boheme was receiving the final touch of her makeover. David sprayed on the initial coat, and while the paint was still tacky, sprayed on 2 more coats. What an amazing transformation. In the coming week, we look forward to the arrival of our longtime Alaskan friends, John and Christy, whom you may remember from our Sailboat Cove videos. We hopefully will be finishing the seahood and hopefully starting on the ceiling. Time will tell. So, until then.